On December 2000, in the tranquil neighborhood of Beverly Hills, California, the anticipated cool breeze of Christmas Eve was shattered by the incessant barking of a dog, owned by a respected local journalist, Susan Berman, a 55-year-old who had decided to stay home for the holidays after an arduous and fulfilling year, fell victim to a chilling execution-style murder within the confines of her own home. Shockingly, not a single gunshot was heard by her unsuspecting neighbors. The stealthy crime left investigators with minimal leads, and the killer remained undetected for over 15 years. However, the mystery surrounding this brutal murder was eventually solved. Why did it take so long to find a killer who wasn't hiding? Who had wanted her dead, and why? Welcome back to Mysterious Hook, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases across the country. Today we're looking at the 20-year-old twisted cold case of Susan Berman, which was finally solved in 2020. This is a case filled with decades of betrayal, lies, deception, and justice almost denied. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe and like buttons. Now, without any further ado, let's dive into the story. As expensive as they come, neighborhoods rarely get more expensive as the famous Beverly Hills. Located in downtown Los Angeles, Beverly Hills is one of the most expensive zip codes in the United States. The average household here earns well over $200,000 per year. It is one of the most expensive cities in the USA. Most of the residents of this historic city were top celebrities and accomplished professionals from all walks of life. But it was here in this affluent part of the world that a chilling murder occurred in 2000. Susan Jane Berman was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA, to David Berman and Betty Ewald on May 18, 1945. Susan's father, David Berman, was a major player in the Jewish American gang on the Las Vegas Strip. He ran the popular Flamingo Hotel in the early bloom days of the Vegas Strip. He was commonly referred to as Dave the Jew.
Susan was the only child of a major Vegas gangster. Her father, Davy Berman, they called him Davy the Jew.
David gave Susan everything she ever needed. Well, maybe not exactly everything. Susan grew up in the Vegas Strip and would return to the Strip from school every day to do her homework, counting the chips at the casino to practice her math.
She would do her homework in the casino counting room using the chips to do her math.
Her dad loved Susan, spoiled her rotten, and he was a quiet man, but very forceful and very well respected. And Susan just absolutely adored him.
While this wasn't the routine for most kids, it looked like she would have a perfect life. But tragedy struck at the tender age of 12. David Berman reportedly died from a heart attack during a routine surgery to remove polyps from his colon. The circumstances surrounding her father's death were both mysterious, controversial, and consequential, as this particular event would change the life of 12-year-old Susan forever.
When Susan was only 12, her father died on the operating table. He was in the hospital for routine surgery. And this was a huge blow to Susan, and it really marked her for the rest of her life.
Her mother couldn't handle it either. Within a year, when she was 13, her mother died, officially by suicide.
This double tragedy meant Susan had to leave Vegas. Susan's uncle, Charles "Chicky" Berman, took her to live with him and his family in Lewiston, Idaho. It was at a junior high school in Lewiston that an English and a history teacher discovered Susan's unmistakable talent for writing and inspired her to pursue a career in writing. Susan subsequently enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, to study sociology. During her final year, she met a graduate student who would become her best friend for life, Robert Allen Durst. Robert, or Bobby Durst as was his nickname, was at UCLA for a one-year master's program. Both students came from privileged backgrounds.
Chicky put her into college at UCLA, and that's where Susan met Bobby Durst. He was in a master's program for a year at UCLA, and she was getting her bachelor's degree. He came from money, she came from money. They both had led privileged childhoods.
And it seemed like they clicked almost instantly. Beyond a privileged background, Susan shared something else in common with her newfound friend. Both Susan and Robert had lost both their mothers at a young age. In 1969, Susan eventually went on to get a master's degree in journalism at the University of California, Berkeley. Susan was a part of a selection of 30 students for the graduate program in journalism at UC Berkeley. According to Elizabeth Moran, one of her classmates who became a national correspondent at the LA Times, Susan was simply exceptional. Of the select 30, none was short of talent and wits, but the aura of Susan made her stand out. She could engage any kind of audience and keep them hooked. Susan had all the ingredients to become a successful journalist, at least according to her classmates. That would prove to be true. Just 2 years after her graduation, she landed a job at the popular newspaper, San Francisco Examiner. She also wrote the famous 1971 college guidebook, The Underground Guide to the College of Your Choice. In the early 80s, Susan moved to New York where she wrote for the New York Magazine, Cosmopolitan, and Family Circle. In New York, Susan met James Brady, an investigative reporter. James and Susan became friends as she began working on writing a memoir about her late father. Susan requested the criminal records and investigative reports about her father from the FBI and the Department of Justice. She was left stunned to see her father, David, had been linked to gangland violence, mob crimes, and several murders, many of which she and her mother were completely oblivious about.
When I was 2 months old, we came to join my father. At that time, he was partner in 3 downtown clubs in downtown Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Club, the El Dorado, and the Apache. And Ben Siegel wanted him to go into partners. They were all part of Lansky's group, but there were many competing divisions. Because of Ben Siegel's temper, my father always said, beware of a man with a terrible temper. He was his best friend, but he didn't want to be partners with him. But in 1946, Meyer Lansky talked my father into taking a partnership in the Flamingo. I grew up in the center of the world, in my opinion. Of course, as a child, it seemed glamorous, and it seemed like we were very important, and our town was, because everyone came to Las Vegas. The end of the 40s, the early 50s, Las Vegas was like Monte Carlo in the United States.
Her 1981 book, Easy Street, The True Story of a Mob Family, eventually became one of her most significant works, where she detailed her life as the daughter of a mobster. The book was such a success that Hollywood producers became interested in adapting the book into a movie. The movie rights were sold for $350,000. The book party was held at Sammy's Romanian Steakhouse on Manhattan's Lower East Side. The book party was hosted by Susan's ever-present best friend, Robert Durst. Susan would later get married to her heartthrob Christopher Margulies at the Hotel Bel Air in L.A. Again, her ever-present best friend, Robert Durst, walked her down the aisle. In 1986, just 2 years after their marriage, Susan would lose the love of her life. Christopher Margulies died of a heroin overdose. By the mid-90s, Susan moved to West Hollywood. The 50-year-old writer was at the peak of her powers and had just been nominated for a Writers Guild of America award. In the late 90s, Susan moved to a rented apartment in Benedict Canyon, one of the main thoroughfares from West Hollywood to the Valley area. It was just 2 miles away from Rodeo Drive, one of the most expensive streets on the planet. Susan was one of the top journalists in the area. She had just begun working on a project titled Sin City for Showtime TV. The project was reportedly Showtime's response to HBO's well-acclaimed TV series, The Sopranos. For Susan, this was the ideal neighborhood. No one knew Susan's biggest project yet would never hit the screens. After Susan moved to Benedict Canyon, she focused more on her upcoming work for Showtime. On December 19, 2000, a few days before Christmas, Susan Berman got on a call with her actress friend, Kim Lankford. It was the first time in several years that Susan and Kim were not spending the holidays together. That call was quite unusual, and Susan seemed worried. The conversation that ensued scared Kim.
Something big. She was going to blow the socks off of something. Something big was going to happen. And I said, well, what? Well, I can't talk about it now, but something big is going to happen.
Susan seemed to have some information that could change a lot of things. Kim was curious to know what this information was, but Susan didn't have it herself. But Susan assured Kim she knew where to get this information. Although Kim feared for her friend's life, Susan was a well-renowned journalist, so Kim presumed this big information was about one of her upcoming big projects. No one knew what exactly this big information was. At 1 p.m. on Christmas Eve 2000, LA police received a call to Susan's home on 1527 Benedict Canyon Road. Her neighbors had become worried when one of her dogs was seen barking and running around loose. This came as a surprise since Susan loved her fox terriers and would never leave them unattended. Police arrived at the scene to find Susan's body murdered in cold blood, execution style with a 9mm handgun. She was shot to the back of the head with a single bullet, and it was estimated that she had been dead for at least 1 day. Kim's fears were confirmed. Susan was dead. Trailing Susan's killer was not going to be easy. Her killer had at least a 1-day head start since the body was found a day late. Police found Susan's body lying on the guest room floor, dressed in sweats and a t-shirt, with only one shell casing lying next to her body. The front door was unlocked, and a rear door was found ajar. Nothing was stolen. Police knew they were dealing with someone who had known the victim, as there was no sign of a forced entry, and there were no defensive wounds found on Susan's body. The motive for her gruesome murder remained unclear. The media began to drive the narrative that the murder was gang-related, since Susan's father David had been a gangster, and she had been killed execution style. But the police noted that most of her father's associates and rivals were already dead, while Susan wrote a memoir about her father, ruling out the possibility of a gang-related murder. The first major lead in the case came sooner than investigators expected. Just 2 days after Susan's death, this major lead, though, was shrouded in mystery. The Beverly Hills Police Department received a mysterious anonymous letter mailed to their office. The letter only contained Susan's address, 1527 Benedict Canyon, in a green pen on a white piece of paper, with the word cadaver. Clearly, someone didn't want Susan's body lying on the floor for long. Police observed that there was a typographical error made by the writer of the letter, with the incorrect spelling of Beverly as Beverly. Although this seemed insignificant at first, little did they know that this minute detail would rather prove to be a crucial piece of evidence, aiding the investigators in their relentless pursuit to apprehend the perpetrator. Even though the police found Susan's body only a day after her death, her killer would not be found so soon. It would take 14 long years, a rather painful wait for the friends and family of Susan Berman. To end this wait, they had to find out who wrote this mystery note. Was it the killer, or was it a witness? Investigators had to piece together a complex puzzle to catch the culprit. Susan was reportedly going to be questioned by the LAPD at the time of her death, in connection with the disappearance of Catherine Durst, her best friend's wife who had gone missing without a trace. Like in many cases of disappearance of a spouse, their partner was considered the prime suspect. Upon further investigation, Robert Durst could not be eliminated as a suspect in the disappearance of his wife, Catherine, and neither could he be charged. All the evidence linking him to her disappearance was merely circumstantial. Since Susan was scheduled to be interviewed by police about what she knew of Robert Durst's possible involvement in the disappearance of his wife, police suspected Robert may have been involved in killing Susan to silence her, but there was no concrete evidence. After 15 years of this very twisted cold case, no one, not even investigators, could have imagined where the first big break would have come from. In the years following Susan Berman's death, Robert, the prime suspect in both cases, was villainized by the press. In an effort to exonerate himself from both unsolved cases, he worked with filmmaker Andrew Jarecki on the documentary The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. The documentary featured 3 of Robert's most prominent alleged criminal activities: the 1982 disappearance of his wife, Catherine Durst, the 2000 point-blank execution of his best friend, Susan Berman, and the 2001 death and dismemberment of Robert's neighbor, Morris Black. Robert had claimed self-defense in the murder of Morris Black and was acquitted at the trial. The uncanny and wriggly Robert Allen Durst was born in New York on April 12, 1943, to Seymour Durst and Bernice Herstein. Robert Durst was the first son of a real estate mogul and the heir to the Durst family empire. When Robert was just 7, he claimed to have witnessed his mother, Bernice, jumping off the edge of the roof of their family home.
What's your first memory of that night that your mother died?
My father came and got me, and he said, "I'd like you to come on over here. I want you to, see Mommy." And we looked out a hall window out onto the roof, and there was Mommy. And I waved at Mommy. I don't know that she saw me. It never went through my mind that, what is she doing out on the roof in her nightie? Yeah, I mean, it just didn't focus on me. There's mommy, wave at mommy. Okay, now go on back to bed.
Most investigators say her death was an accident, and the family acknowledged that Bernice took her own life. In a March 2015 interview with the New York Times, Robert's brother, Douglas Durst, claimed no one witnessed the event. Why Robert claims to have witnessed his mother's death remains unclear. This conflicting report was just one of many blows and counterblows of a fearsome sibling rivalry like no other. At age 10, Robert visited his psychiatrist to counsel him on this newfound sibling rivalry. The psychiatrist reported that Robert had personality decomposition and schizophrenia. He attended the Scarsdale High School where his classmates described him as a loner. He obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from Lehigh University in 1965. Later that year, he met Susan Berman at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, where he enrolled in a doctoral program, but eventually withdrew from the school and returned to New York in 1969. At this time, Robert had no interest in his father's company, Durst Organization. He preferred to start something of his own, so between 1970 and 1971, he opened a small health food store in Vermont. In 1970, Robert met Catherine McCormack, a dental hygienist, and in January 1972, the pair began living together in Vermont. In 1973, on the advice of Robert's father, they returned to New York so Robert could work with the Durst Organization. And on April 12, 1973, on Robert's 30th birthday, he officially got married to Catherine. Although to many friends of the couple, they appeared to have a fairy tale life, a closer look at their lives in the weeks leading to Catherine's disappearance shows there was more to it than meets the eye. A few weeks before her death, many signs pointed to foul play. Catherine had been treated for facial bruises inflicted on her by Robert just 3 weeks before her disappearance at Jacob Medical Center in the Bronx. She never pressed charges. A few weeks before her mysterious disappearance, she had asked Robert for a $250,000 divorce settlement. Robert was not interested in parting with so much money and instead offered $100,000 to Catherine. Before Catherine could review the offer, Robert had grown impatient. He canceled his wife's credit card, removed her name from their joint account, and stopped paying her tuition fees at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He also reduced his divorce payout offer to $15,000. On January 31, 1982, a few months before she earned her degree in pediatrics from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City, Catherine Durst simply disappeared into thin air. Catherine was last seen at a dinner party organized by her friend Gilbert Najami in Newtown, Connecticut on the eve of January 31st. Catherine and Robert were known to have fought that evening. Catherine's cottage was found ransacked shortly after she was declared missing, and 3 weeks after her disappearance, police found her possessions in the building's garbage compactor. Catherine was declared legally dead in 2017, but her disappearance and the exact circumstances remain a mystery even to this day. Months before Susan was killed, the NYPD had been asked to reopen the investigation into the disappearance of Catherine at the request of Westchester County District Attorney Janine Pirro. The investigation was publicized, and friends urged investigators to contact Susan Berman for an interview since she was close to Robert. Susan Berman had managed Robert Durst's interviews with the media after the disappearance of his wife. She reportedly knew much about the disappearance. While his wife's disappearance remained a mystery, and his involvement in Susan's death a mere suspicion, Robert's next act was more clear-cut. On October 9, 2001, he was arrested in connection with the death of his elderly neighbor, Morris Black. Morris's body parts were found dismembered, floating in Galveston Bay in Texas. After being released on bail amounting to $250,000, he failed to appear for a court hearing scheduled on October 16th, resulting in a warrant being issued for his arrest due to bail jumping. Then on November 30th, Durst was apprehended at a Wegmans supermarket in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where he had attempted to shoplift Band-Aids, a newspaper, and a chicken salad sandwich. Some suspicious items were found in his rental car when he was apprehended: $37,000 in cash, 2 guns, marijuana, Black's driver's license, and directions to Gilbert Najami's home in Connecticut. While evading authorities, Durst disturbingly used his time to stalk his own brother, Douglas, even going so far to visit the driveway of his residence in Katona, New York, while armed. He was eventually extradited to Texas for trial. In 2003, Robert Durst stood trial for the murder of Morris Black. His defense attorney, Dick DeGuerin, argued Robert had acted in self-defense, and the weapons discharged as they both struggled when Morris threatened him with a .22 caliber pistol. Robert admitted to having dismembered Morse's body with a knife, saw, and axe before dumping his remains in Galveston Bay. Since Morse's head was never found, Robert's claim of a struggle and location of the gunshot wound could not be confirmed or dismissed. On November 11, 2003, the jury acquitted Robert Durst for lack of forensics to prove capital murder. He, however, received a 5-year sentence for tampering with evidence and jumping bail. He was paroled in July 2005. The terms of Robert Durst's parole required him to stay near his home and seek authorization before making any trip. Robert Durst made an unauthorized trip back to the crime scene, where he had killed Morris Black. On his defiant crime tour, he ran into an unexpected but familiar face, Galveston County District Court Judge Susan Criss, who had presided over his murder trial. They were both shocked to see each other. With this unauthorized trip, Robert Durst violated his parole terms and was returned to prison. He was then released in March 2006. Robert was naturally the heir of the Durst organization, but in 1992, his father decided to pick his younger brother Douglas Durst to take over the Durst organization, another stern choice in the already heated sibling rivalry. His father said that his choice of Douglas was due to Robert's inappropriate conduct, but Robert was having none of that. He believed he was the rightful heir to the Durst organization, and after returning from prison, he decided to sue his family. The lengthy lawsuit finally ended in 2006, and Robert Durst was bought out for a one-time payment of $65 million. This lawsuit brought a more tumultuous twist to the relationship between Durst and his family. The jinx was supposed to clear the air, but it turned out to be an actual jinx for Robert. During the filming of the jinx, Susan Berman's stepson, Sarib Kaufman, uncovered a letter Robert had written to Susan in 1999, a few months before her death. The typographical error was the same in both Robert's letter and the anonymous letter sent to the police. The handwriting was almost indistinguishable. When the director of the jinx, Jarecki, saw the letter, he showed Robert Durst the spelling of the word Beverly from both letters and asked which one Robert didn't write, but the enigmatic millionaire could tell and was rather left stunned. On March 14, 2015, a day before the airing of the final episode of the HBO series The Jinx, Robert Durst was arrested by the FBI in New Orleans and charged with the first-degree murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. Robert made a few checks to his voicemail box, enabling investigators to trace his location. He remained stunned investigators were able to trace him to the Canal Street Marriott, having checked in with the false name Everett Ward. A fake Texas ID was also found, a .38 caliber loaded revolver, a new phone, a flesh-tone latex mask, maps of Louisiana, Florida, and Cuba, and over $200,000 in cash were found with Robert. According to bank transactions, he had withdrawn over $315,000 in the last 5 to 6 weeks. Investigators speculate he was planning to flee to Cuba, since they have no extradition treaty with the U.S. After a lifetime of circumventing the law, Robert Durst would finally come face to face with justice. Robert Durst initially received an 85-month sentence for his firearm charges while he awaited trial in the Susan Berman case. The trial was delayed due to Robert undergoing surgery and the prosecutors seeking more evidence to finally put the elusive killer behind bars. In October 2018, Judge Mark Wyndham of the Los Angeles County Superior Court finally decided there was enough evidence to charge Robert Durst with the murder of his best friend, Susan Berman. On March 2, 2020, after much delay, Robert Durst finally appeared in court to begin his trial. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the trial was postponed to May 17, 2021. During the trial, Robert's defense team asked for a mistrial and a halt to the trial at least 3 times due to Robert's ailing medical condition, but the jury decided to proceed with the trial each time. Robert Durst was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Susan Berman.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Robert Durst, guilty of the crime of first-degree murder of Susan Berman.
On October 14, 2021, he was finally sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated at the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. On November 1, 2021, after almost 40 long years, a New York grand jury finally indicted Robert Durst for the murder of his wife, but he would never stand trial. On January 10, 2022, Robert died of cardiac arrest, just 3 months after his sentencing, aged 78. After Robert's sentence was read, one of Susan Berman's cousins, David Berman, said he visited Susan Berman's grave and told her she could rest easy that justice has been done.
Okay. I visited her and told her she could rest easy. The justice has been done.
Ellen Strauss, a friend of Catherine Durst, was happy that Susan's family would finally get justice, but then hoped that Catherine would get justice too before Robert died. According to California law, Robert Durst's death renders moot the murder charge filed against him for the death of his wife. Douglas Durst said this of his brother Robert's death: "Bob lived a sad, painful, and tragic life. We hope that his death brings some closure to those he hurt." Robert Durst had diverted justice through elaborate schemes crafted to hide his heinous crimes. His final installment in his crafty scheme served to reveal how he betrayed his wife, best friend, and neighbor. Do you think Susan Berman knew about the disappearance of Catherine Durst? Do you think she was killed because he was going to reveal what she knew to the police? As one FBI agent once said, "God allows criminals to make mistakes, but it's up to us to find them." Do you think the jinx was that mistake? Let us know in the comments.